My name is Renee Beaumont. I am 34 years old. For 9 years I have worked as a food safety inspector for the county health department, which means I have spent 9 years walking into other people's kitchens and finding the thing they hoped I wouldn't find. But here's what none of them knew, not my brother, not my parents, not the 40-some relatives who stood in my mother's backyard on the 4th of July with paper plates balanced on their knees, is that the folder I was carrying that afternoon, the plain manila one I'd left in the trunk of my car until exactly the right moment, had my brother's name on it in my own handwriting. Not his business's name. His name. Brian Whitaker, in the same block letters I use on a violation notice, because by the time I filed that folder shut for the last time, that is exactly what it had become. Welcome back to my Chanel, where the quietest person in the room always has the longest memory. If you have ever found out that someone you trusted had been using your name behind your back, your credit, your license, your good reputation, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. To explain what happened at that cookout, I have to go back almost a year and a half, to a Tuesday afternoon in March when my brother called me sounding more excited than I had heard him sound in a decade. I grew up in Seguin, Texas, in a house on Guadalupe Street 2 blocks from the pecan shell mosaic they built downtown, the one tourists take pictures of and nobody local really looks at twice anymore. My father worked at the feed store for 31 years. My mother did the books for 3 different small businesses at once, spread across her kitchen table on a rotation, and I think that is where I learned that numbers do not care about your feelings, they just sit there being true. I was the daughter who did everything by the book. Brian was the son who thought the book was a suggestion. I want to be honest about what that meant growing up, because it is not a flattering thing to say about your own brother, but it is true. Brian was 2 years younger than me, and he was the kind of charming that made teachers give him extensions and made girls forgive him things and made our own mother, God love her, believe every single time that this next thing was going to be the thing that finally stuck. A landscaping business. A food truck that sold snow cones out of a repurposed ice cream truck he bought off a Facebook marketplace listing in Guadalupe County for $1,100. A multi-level marketing thing involving protein powder that I am fairly sure cost him more than it ever paid him. I loved him. I want that on the record before anything else, because everything I did later came out of that, not out of spite. I loved my brother the entire time I was documenting what he did to me. I went a different way. I got my associate's degree in environmental science from the community college in New Braunfels, then finished my bachelor's online while working nights at a diner on Court Street, and I took the state food safety inspector exam the same month I turned 26. I still remember the smell of that exam room, cold coffee and dry erase marker and the particular hum of a window unit fighting July heat, because I have a habit of remembering rooms by what they smelled like. It is probably an occupational thing. When you spend your working life sniffing walk-in coolers for the first note of something going bad, you start cataloging every room you're ever in without meaning to. My first supervisor, a heavy-set, patient man named Owen Castellano who trained half the inspectors currently working in this district, used to say the same thing to every new hire on their first ride-along: you are not here to make friends with the owner. You are here to make sure the customer eating lunch tomorrow doesn't end up in a hospital bed because somebody didn't want to hurt your feelings today. I didn't fully understand what he meant until my 3rd month on the job, standing in the back kitchen of a barbecue joint off Court Street, watching a cook I liked personally, a soft-spoken older man named Delmar who always asked about my mother, thaw a case of brisket on the counter at room temperature because the walk-in was too full to fit it. I wrote the citation anyway. Delmar wasn't angry. He just nodded, said you're right, I know better, and fixed it before I left the parking lot. That is the day I understood that being liked and being correct are 2 entirely separate jobs, and only one of them is actually mine. Nobody asks you to hand over your name all at once. They ask for one hallway at a time, a contact line here, a favor there, and by the time you notice the hallway has become the whole house, you're already standing in a room you never agreed to enter. By the time this story starts, I had been a county food safety inspector for 9 years. I carried a badge that said Guadalupe County Health Department. I carried a clipboard, a digital thermometer I trusted more than most people, and a certification number that I had worked 4 years and one very hard exam to earn. That number is not decorative. It is what allows an establishment to legally claim that a certified food manager is associated with their operation. It goes on paperwork. It goes on permit applications. County clerks check it. Health departments cross-reference it. It is, in the most literal sense possible, my name with teeth in it. I tell you all of that so you understand exactly what my brother took from me, and exactly why I was the wrong person to take it from. Brian Whitaker is likable. I want to say that plainly, because if I only tell you the bad parts, this stops sounding like a real person and starts sounding like a cartoon, and my brother was never a cartoon. He was, and still is, the kind of man who remembers your kid's birthday, who will show up at 6 in the morning to help you move a couch, who tells a story about a flat tire on I-10 so well that people ask him to tell it again at the next barbecue. When we were teenagers, he used to walk me home from the Sonic on Highway 46 in the dark because he didn't like the idea of me walking alone, even though I was older than him and could have walked myself home just fine. That March, he called me while I was sitting in my car in a Buc-ee's parking lot off I-35, eating a kolache on my lunch break between inspections. Nay, he said, he's called me Nay since he was 4 and couldn't say the whole thing. I think I finally found it. Found what? The thing. The actual thing. I've been thinking about it for months. A food truck, but not like the snow cone truck, a real one. Tex-Mex, breakfast tacos in the morning, brisket plates by lunch. I found a used truck out of San Marcos, guys practically giving it away because the transmission's shot on his tow vehicle, not the truck itself. I got a mechanic buddy who'll fix that for parts cost. I want to be honest about the next part, because it is one of the moments I am not proud of. I did not ask him a single hard question. I said that sounded exciting. I said I was proud of him for thinking it through this time instead of just jumping. I finished my kolache and went to my 2 o'clock inspection at a barbecue place on Court Street that had, coincidentally, one of the cleanest walk-in coolers I'd seen all year, and I did not think about my brother's truck again until May. That is the first vulnerability moment I want to name honestly, because if I skip past it, this whole story sounds like I saw everything coming and let it happen anyway out of some plan. I didn't see it coming. I wanted to believe him. That is not the same as being foolish. It is just what loving someone costs sometimes, before you know the bill. The red flags did not arrive all at once. They arrived the way most real problems do, small, spaced out, each one explainable on its own, until one day you look up and realize you have been explaining things away for over a year. I want to give you the full timeline, because delayed gratification is part of what makes a story like this true instead of tidy. Real red flags don't arrive as a montage. They arrive with months of ordinary life packed in between them, birthdays and grocery runs and nothing wrong at all, which is exactly what makes it so easy to miss the pattern until it's already finished forming. The first one was in May, when Brian asked if he could put my name down as an additional contact on the food truck's health permit application, because, and I remember his exact words, the state office moves faster for people who already have a license number on file, and yours is already in the system. I said sure. It seemed harmless. A certified food manager being listed as a contact on a small operation is not unusual. Plenty of small operators lean on a relative or friend who already has the credential rather than sending every single employee through the 4-hour certification course. I told myself that was all this was. The second flag came in July, 4 months in, when my mother mentioned at Sunday dinner that Brian had told her Renee helped me get the loan for the truck. I hadn't helped him get any loan. I asked him about it that same night, standing in my mother's kitchen while she rinsed dishes and pretended not to listen. It's not a big deal, he said. I just told the guy at the credit union that my sister's a county inspector. It made him feel better about the whole food safety side of things. I wasn't saying you co-signed anything. That explanation held together. Barely. But it held. The third flag was smaller than the others, and it is the one that, looking back, should have worried me the most, precisely because it was so small. In September, I got an email notification, One of those automated ones you get when your name is attached to a public search, informing me that a Renee Beaumont had been listed as an authorized representative on a Texas comptroller's sales tax permit application filed under an assumed name, Whitaker's Roadside Kitchen. I remember sitting in my car outside a Sonic drive-in reading that email twice, the AC blasting, feeling a specific kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. I called Brian. He answered on the second ring, laughing about something before I even said hello. "Hey, so, weird question," I said. "Did you put my name on a tax permit for the truck?" There was a pause. Just long enough that I noticed it. "It's basically your business too, Nay," he said. "I mean, I couldn't have gotten off the ground without you backing me up on the food safety side. I figured it was easier to just list you as a rep than to walk you through signing 100 separate things. You're barely even doing anything different than what you'd already agreed to." I want to be honest about the part that's hard to admit here. I let it go again. I told him that from now on, anything with my name on it needed my signature first, actual signature, not verbal permission over the phone while I was ordering a Route 44. He said, of course, you're right, my bad." And because he sounded sincere, and because he is my brother, and because the truck seemed to genuinely be doing well, he was posting pictures of lines forming outside it on the feeder road near the outlet mall, real customers, real tacos, real cash register. I let the cold feeling pass instead of following it. That is the second honesty signal I want to give you, and it is this: for months, I chose the version of events that let me keep loving my brother without doing anything uncomfortable about it. I was not stupid. I was avoiding a fight I did not want to have. The red flags kept coming through the fall, small and explainable, each one a little heavier than the last. In October, a co-worker at the health department, a sharp, quiet man named Walter Nunez who processes half the permit paperwork for our district, mentioned in passing that he'd seen my certification number listed on a mobile food unit application and assumed I'd finally started my own side venture. We were standing in the break room at the time, the coffee maker doing its slow, unpleasant gurgle in the corner, the smell of microwaved leftovers thick in the air the way it always is in that particular room at 11 in the morning. "Didn't know you had your own truck now, Beaumont," Walter said, not looking up from the paperwork in his hand. "Saw your cert number on a filing this morning. Figured you finally jumped ship on all of us." I laughed it off. I told him no, that was my brother's operation, I was just helping him out. Walter shrugged, said something about how family businesses always end up more complicated than they look on paper, and went back to his stack of applications. He didn't push. He had no reason to push. From where he stood, it was a perfectly ordinary thing, a sister lending her credential to a brother's small operation, the kind of arrangement that happens all over this county without incident. But I noticed, the way you notice a smell out of place in a kitchen that's supposed to be clean, that something about saying that sentence out loud made my stomach drop in a way it hadn't before. I remember standing at my own desk 20 minutes later, staring at a blank inspection form, unable to remember what establishment I was supposed to be writing it up for. In November, Brian asked me to come by the truck on a Saturday to help with an inspection thing, and when I got there, a real county inspector, not me, I don't inspect my own family's operations, that would be a conflict of interest and I take that rule seriously, was standing at the service window with a clipboard, and Brian introduced me as my sister. "She's actually licensed, she helps me run the food safety side." The inspector, a woman I knew casually named Priscilla Ortiz from the next district over, tall, unhurried, the kind of inspector who writes everything down in small, even handwriting before she says a word out loud, looked at me with an expression I can only describe as professionally curious. "You're listed as the certified food manager of record on this unit?" She asked me directly, pen already moving toward the line on her form. "No," I said. "I'm not." I watched Brian's face do something small and fast before he smoothed it back into a smile and said he must have misspoken. He meant I'd helped him study for his own exam. "Ha, sisters, you know how it is." Priscilla didn't write that down either. She just looked between the two of us for a beat longer than was comfortable, made a small note I couldn't read from where I was standing, and moved on to checking the thermometer calibration on the steam table, the way inspectors do when they've decided a thing isn't theirs to chase down today. I have thought about that beat, that small pause of hers, many times since. I think she knew something was off. I think she decided, professionally, that it wasn't her citation to write. He had not asked me to help him study for any exam. As far as I knew, he had not taken the exam at all. That night I could not sleep. I lay in bed running the timeline in my head, the additional contact in May, the loan comment in July, the tax permit in September, the certified food manager claim in November, and for the first time I let myself say the sentence out loud, alone, in the dark of my own bedroom, he is building something on top of me, and he is not asking. I still did not confront him. I want to be honest about that too. Instead, I did what 9 years of inspection work had trained me to do when something smells wrong and I cannot yet prove it. I started keeping a log. The discovery moment came on a cold Tuesday morning in the first week of February, almost 11 months after that first phone call in the Buc-ee's parking lot. I was at the Guadalupe County Clerk's office on North Austin Street for an unrelated reason. I needed a certified copy of a septic permit for an inspection I was doing on a property near Cordova Road, and while I was there, waiting at the counter, I asked the clerk, almost as an afterthought, whether she could pull up any assumed name certificates filed under my name. I told myself I was just being thorough. I think some part of me had known for weeks that I would eventually ask that exact question in that exact building, and had simply been waiting for a reason that let me ask it without it looking like what it was. The clerk, a woman named Delia Fuentes who has worked that counter for as long as I've had a driver's license, typed for a moment, frowned at her screen, and turned it toward me. There were 2 filings. Not 1. 2. The first was an assumed name certificate, a DBA, doing business as, for Whitaker's Roadside Kitchen, filed the previous March, listing Brian Whitaker as the owner and Renee Beaumont as co-owner. Co-owner. Not contact. Not representative. Co-owner, with a signature line at the bottom that had my name typed in a font, not signed in ink, because whoever filled it out had used the online portal, which does not require a notarized signature for an assumed name certificate in Texas, only a sworn statement of accuracy that the filer checks a box to attest. The second filing was newer, from that January, less than a month old. A second assumed name certificate, this one for Whitaker Mobile Catering Events, again listing Brian as owner, again listing me as co-owner, this one attached to an application for a business line of credit through a regional bank, the kind of line that requires the bank to run a credit check on every listed owner. I asked Delia if she could print both. She could. She did. I remember the sound the printer made, that particular flat mechanical hum county office printers all seem to share, and I remember standing at that counter in a building that smelled like old paper and radiator heat, the same smell every county building in Texas seems to have, no matter the county, reading my own name typed into a legal filing I had never seen before that morning. That afternoon, sitting in my car in the clerk's office parking lot, I did the thing I do professionally every single day of my working life. I pulled my credit report. There was a business credit card under Whitaker Mobile Catering Events. The credit limit was $20,000. The balance was $18,412. I had never applied for it. I had never received a card in the mail for it. I had never made a single payment on it, and yet there it sat, attached to my social security number, 18 months of activity I had never approved and had no memory of, dragging down a credit score I had spent a decade building carefully, the same way I build a case file, one document at a time, checked twice, never rushed. I sat in that parking lot for 11 minutes without starting the car. I know it was 11 minutes because I looked at the clock when I first opened the printed documents and I looked at it again when I finally put the key in the ignition. 11 minutes is not very long, in the scheme of a life. It felt considerably longer than that. I want to describe those 11 minutes honestly, because I think the honest version matters more than the tidy one. I did not cry. I have never cried in front of my brother in my life, and I was not about to start alone in a parking lot on his behalf. What I did instead was read the documents 4 separate times, the way I read an inspection report before I sign it, checking each line against the last to make sure I hadn't misunderstood something simple in the heat of the moment. Each time I read it, it said the same thing. My name. His signature adjacent sworn statement. 18 months. $18,412. The heat outside the car climbed high enough that the windows started to sweat a little at the edges, and I remember thinking, with a strange, detached clarity, that this was probably close to the exact temperature at which I would write up a walk-in cooler for holding food unsafely, and that there was something almost funny about my own life finally reaching the threshold I spend my working hours measuring in other people's kitchens. Here is the part one want to be honest about, because it is not a flattering thing to admit, and I promised you I would tell you the parts that are hard to admit. Sitting in that parking lot, I almost called Brian right then and asked him, quietly, privately, to just fix it. Take my name off. Pay down the card. No lawyers, no scene, no county clerk's office paper trail becoming anything more than a private correction between a brother and sister who loved each other. I almost let him have that exit before I had even confirmed how deep this went. That is how much I did not want this to be what it clearly already was. I did not make that call that day. I drove home instead, and I called Mag Doyle. If you've ever had someone use your name, your credit, or your good standing without your permission, even someone you loved, tell me in the comments below. I want to know I'm not the only one who almost let it go because the person doing it was family. Mag Doyle has practiced law in Guadalupe County for just over 30 years. She wears her reading glasses on a chain around her neck, has represented half the small businesses on the downtown square at one point or another, and has a way of listening to a whole story without once interrupting, then asking exactly one question that makes you realize what you actually need to do. I had used her firm years earlier to look over the lease on my own apartment, nothing dramatic, and she had remembered my name when I called, which told me something about the kind of practice she runs. Her office sits above a hardware store on the square, up a narrow staircase that smells like cedar shelving and old carpet glue, and her waiting room has the same 3 magazines it has had for as long as I've been going there, fanned out on a side table like nobody's ever quite sure whether to touch them. I sat across from her desk 2 days after the clerk's office, the printed filings and the credit report laid out between us like evidence at a trial, which, in a sense, they were about to become. She read through everything twice before she said a word, the way she always does, her pen tapping once against the desk at the parts that mattered and staying still at the parts that didn't. When she finally looked up, she took her glasses off slowly and let them drop against the chain, and I had already learned enough about her by then to know that was the signal that something important was about to be said. I want to ask you something before we get into the mechanics of fixing this, she said. Not as your lawyer. As someone who's watched a lot of families go through a version of this. Do you want your brother to feel bad, or do you want your name back? Those are not always the same goal, and people mix them up more often than you'd think. I want my name back, I said, and I meant it, though it took me a moment to be sure I meant it as fully as I said it. Good, she said. Because the paperwork doesn't care how bad anybody feels. It only cares what's true on the page. Let's start there. How much of this did you know about before this week? She asked, not unkindly. Pieces, I said. I knew he'd listed me as a contact. I didn't know about the co-ownership filings. I definitely didn't know about the card. Mag took off her glasses and let them hang on the chain, which I would learn over the following weeks is the thing she does right before she tells you something you don't want to hear but need to. Here's the good news, if we can call it that, she said. Texas doesn't require notarization on an assumed name certificate filed through the county portal. That's how he did this without forging a wet signature, which would have been a more serious criminal matter on top of everything else. But it also means the fix is more straightforward than it would be otherwise. You didn't sign anything. There's no signature to contest. There's a sworn statement he made, attesting that the information was accurate, and it wasn't. That's the exposure. Not yours. His. And the card? The bank is going to want a fraud affidavit from you, a police report if you're willing to file one, and documentation showing you never authorized the account. Given the paper trail already sitting in front of me, that should not be difficult to establish. The harder question isn't whether you can get your name off this. You absolutely can. The harder question is what you want to happen to your brother once you do. That was the question I sat with for the next several weeks, longer than I expected to need. I want to be honest about the second time I almost gave up on all of this, because it happened right there, in Mag's office, staring at a stack of paper that proved everything and answered nothing about what came next. I don't want him arrested, I said finally. Nobody's talking about arrest yet, Mag said. I'm talking about protecting your name and your credit, cleanly, on paper, in a way that can't be argued with later. What happens to your brother's business is a separate question, and it's one only you can answer, because it isn't really a legal question. It's a family one. She was right, and I knew she was right, and it did not make the next part easier. Over the following 6 weeks, I did the quiet preparation that this story required, the kind that doesn't look like much from the outside and feels, from the inside, like carrying something heavy up a staircase one step at a time with your face arranged to look like you're not carrying anything at all. I filed a written amendment with the county clerk's office to remove myself as a listed co-owner on both assumed name certificates, supported by an affidavit Mag drafted stating I had never signed, authorized, or consented to being listed. Delia Fuentes processed it herself, and though she said nothing about the situation directly, she looked at me the way you look at someone whose paperwork you have just quietly helped correct, and told me to have a good rest of my week in a tone that said more than the words did. I filed a fraud affidavit with the bank that had issued the business card, along with copies of the amended county filings showing I had never legally been a co-owner of either entity in the first place. The bank's fraud department, to their credit, moved faster than I expected once the paperwork was in front of them. Within 3 weeks, the $18,412 balance was formally disputed and frozen pending investigation, and a case number was assigned that Mag told me to keep in a folder along with everything else. I pulled my own credit report a second time, a month after the first, mostly to see the damage clearly rather than in fragments. The number that stared back at me, the drop from where I'd been to where 18 months of my brother's decisions had put me, is not a number I am going to say out loud in this story, because some things you keep for yourself even when you're telling everyone else everything. I will say that it was the kind of number that makes a mortgage broker's face change when they see it, and I know that because I had, in fact, been quietly pre-qualifying for a small home loan the year before all of this started, on a little craftsman house 2 streets over from where I grew up, and that plan sat frozen in a drawer for the better part of a year because of a business I had never agreed to be part of. I did not confront Brian during any of this. That was deliberate, and it is the part of the story where I have to be honest about the third vulnerability moment, because it was the hardest one. My mother called me in April, during those quiet weeks, worried because Brian had mentioned the truck's expansion was hitting a snag with the bank and he didn't know why. She asked me, gently, if I knew anything about it, because he'd said something about my name being on some paperwork and a hold being put on things. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, and for one long moment, I wanted to tell her everything was fine. I wanted to say I didn't know what he meant, let her keep believing whatever comfortable version of the story she had assembled, and let the whole thing quietly resolve itself in county paperwork nobody in the family would ever look at. It would have been so much easier to let her keep her comfortable idea of her son a little longer. There's some paperwork stuff between me and Brian, I said instead. It's being handled. I don't want to get into it over the phone, Mama. She let it go, because that is who she is, but I could hear in her voice that she knew there was more, and I hung up feeling the particular loneliness of holding a truth that is going to hurt people you love no matter how carefully you eventually set it down. Mag's advice, when I told her about that call, was the turning point line I had been circling without quite landing on for 6 weeks. You've spent this whole process protecting Brian from consequences he created, she said. You corrected your name quietly. You disputed the card quietly. You haven't said a single hard word to him directly. At some point, quiet protection just becomes covering for him, and that's not the same thing as being kind. You get to decide when that point is. But you should decide it on purpose, not just let it keep drifting. If you're the one who's always been the responsible sibling, the one who fixes things quietly so nobody else has to see the mess. Subscribe. You'll want to see how this one lands, because I promise you, it does land. I decided the point had come on the morning of the 4th of July. My mother hosts the same cookout every year in the backyard on Guadalupe Street, the same folding tables under the same pecan trees, the same coolers of Big Red and Topo Chico sweating in the heat, 40-some relatives and neighbors drifting between the grill and the shade like it's choreographed even though nobody's ever once rehearsed it. I knew Brian would be there. I also knew, because my mother had mentioned it twice in the preceding week with the kind of pride that made my chest ache a little, that Brian had asked to say a few words that afternoon about the truck's big expansion news. He had, it turned out, secured a second location, a stationary spot behind a gas station on Highway 123, with an actual small dining patio, financed in part by that same frozen business line of credit he did not yet know was frozen, and in part by a private loan from a family friend he had apparently told, in so many words, that my sister and I are business partners. She's the food safety side of the whole operation. I found that out from the family friend herself, a woman named Loretta Vance who has known my mother for 40 years and who cornered me by the tamale pot an hour before Brian's announcement to tell me, with real warmth, how proud she was that Brian and I had built something together, and how she hoped the extra $5,000 she'd lent him would help you two get the second location's patio furniture squared away. Loretta is a small, sturdy woman with a laugh that carries across a whole backyard, the kind of family friend who has been at every graduation, every funeral, every quiet hospital waiting room our family has ever sat in. She was wearing a sun hat that afternoon, the wide straw kind with a chin string she never actually uses, and she smelled like sunscreen and the sweet tea she'd clearly already had 2 cups of. She meant every word of what she said to me. That is what made it so much harder to hear. He talks about you like you hung the moon, you know, she said, adjusting a foil pan of beans on the table between us. Says you're the reason the bank ever took him seriously in the first place. I told my Harold, I said, that boy finally got his act together because his sister's steady enough for the both of them. I stood there holding a paper plate I hadn't put anything on yet, and I felt the particular kind of dread that comes from realizing a lie has traveled further and grown warmer in other people's mouths than it ever did in your own. It is one thing to find your name on a county filing. It is another thing entirely to hear it repeated back to you, affectionately, by someone who loves your family and has no idea she is holding a version of you that does not exist. I told her, gently, that there was no you too. I watched her face change the way faces do when a fact lands somewhere it wasn't expected. She didn't say much else. She just nodded slowly and went to refill her cup, and I understood in that moment that whatever I did next was not only going to happen to Brian, it was going to happen in front of Loretta, and my mother, and my father, and a yard full of people who had been told, in various small ways over 18 months, a version of my life that was not true. I went to my car. I got the folder out of the trunk. It had been sitting there for 2 days, because some part of me had known exactly where this was heading before I let myself admit it out loud, even to Mag. Brian stood on an upturned cooler near the grill around 3 that afternoon, the way he does every year when he wants everyone's attention without asking for it directly, and started talking about the truck, the new location, how none of this happens without Renee backing me the whole way, food safety side, business side, all of it. My sister's been the real MVP of this whole operation and she never even asks for credit. I want to describe the sound of that yard in that moment, because sensory detail is the only way to make you understand what it actually felt like. The cicadas were going in the pecan trees, that heavy summer drone that never quite stops in a Texas July. Somebody's radio was playing low from a truck bed 2 yards over. The charcoal smell from the grill was thick enough to taste. And under all of it, 40-some people were nodding along to a story about me that had never happened. I did not raise my voice. If anything, I lowered it, the way I do when I am standing in front of a restaurant owner about to tell them their walk-in cooler is 11 degrees too warm and I need them to understand I am not angry, I am simply correct, and the correction is not optional. Brian, I said, before you go further, I need everybody to hear something, and I need you to hear it first. He laughed, the easy laugh he's always had, and said something like here she goes, always modest, and gestured for me to come stand next to him like this was still the moment he thought it was. I did not go stand next to him. I stayed where I was, near the tamale pot, and I opened the folder. I am not your business partner, I said. I never agreed to be listed as a co-owner on either of your assumed name certificates. I never authorized a business credit card in my name. I found out about all of it in February, at the county clerk's office, on a day I happened to be there for something else entirely. The yard did not go instantly silent. It went silent the way a room goes silent when something is happening that people haven't fully processed yet, a lag, a half second where the cicadas were still louder than the humans. Then it caught up. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father set down his cup on the table without looking at it. Loretta Vance, standing by the fence, went very still. Brian's face did the thing I had seen it do once before, at the food truck window in front of the inspector, that fast smoothing motion, except this time it did not smooth all the way. Nay, come on, that's not the whole story, that's not fair, you knew about. I knew you listed me as a contact in May, I said, flat, clear, the voice I use when I am writing up a violation and the owner is standing right there watching me write it. Tax season voice. No adjectives in it. I did not know about the DBA filings. I did not know about the credit card. I have the county records here, and I have the credit report, and I have the bank's fraud case number, if anyone would like to see it. I held the folder up. Not thrown, not waved dramatically. Just held it, the way you hold a clipboard when you're about to read a citation out loud, because you want the person receiving it to see that it exists, that it is real paper, that it has weight. Renee, we can talk about this after. This isn't the place, Brian said, and I want to be fair to him here, because this is the moment where his humanizing truth came out, quieter than everything else he'd said that day, almost lost under the cicadas. I never thought it'd get this big this fast. I just needed the file to move faster, and your name moves things faster than mine does. It always has. You did everything right your whole life and I never did anything right, and I thought if I just borrowed a little bit of your name until I got on my feet, I'd pay it back before you even noticed. I didn't mean for it to turn into $18,000. I believed that he believed that. I want to say that clearly, because it matters. I do not think my brother woke up 18 months earlier planning to put me $18,000 into debt. I think he borrowed a little, told himself it was temporary, and then kept borrowing because the alternative, telling our parents, admitting the truck wasn't holding up the way he'd said it was, felt harder than just letting it keep growing quietly in the dark, the way debt always does when nobody's looking at it directly. That understanding did not change what I did next. Understanding why someone did something is not the same as excusing it, and it is not the same as staying quiet about it either. You had a chance to fix this quietly, I said. In February, when I found out, I could have called you privately and asked you to take my name off everything and pay down the card on your own timeline. I chose not to do that yet, because I wanted to see if you'd come to me first. You didn't. Instead you took out a private loan from Loretta using my name as collateral for trust she has in me, not in you, and you stood on a cooler in front of our whole family and did it again, right now, in front of everyone. Loretta made a small sound near the fence. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on my brother. So here's where we are, I said. I have already filed to remove myself from both assumed name certificates at the county clerk's office. That's done. I have already disputed the credit card with the bank as unauthorized. That's in process, and it will very likely resolve in my favor because none of it had my signature on it, only yours, on a sworn statement you filed saying the information was accurate when it wasn't. What happens after that, whether the bank pursues you directly for the balance, whether Loretta wants her $5,000 back on different terms than the ones you gave her, that's between you and them. I am not asking anyone here to punish you. I am asking everyone here to stop repeating a story about me that was never true. Brian did not say anything for what felt like a long time but was probably 8 or 9 seconds. The cicadas were still going. Somewhere behind me, I heard my father exhale, long and slow, the sound of a man setting down something he'd been carrying without knowing it. I'm sorry, Brian finally said, quietly, to me, not to the yard. I really am, nay. I know, I said. I'm not doing this because I don't believe you. I'm doing it because being sorry doesn't take my name off a filing. Paper does that. I just did the paper part myself, since you didn't. If this hit close to home, if you've ever had to correct the record in front of people you love, knowing it was going to cost you something to do it, share this with someone who needs to hear that quiet correction is not the same thing as cruelty. The aftermath was not dramatic in the way movies make these things look. There was no shouting match after the yard cleared, no slammed door, no suitcase wheeled across gravel. Brian left the cookout about 20 minutes later, quietly, after a short conversation with our father on the back porch that I was not part of and did not ask to be part of. My mother cried, briefly, in the kitchen, and told me she wished I had told her sooner, and I told her I wished that too, and that was, in its own way, its own small repair. Over the following 2 months, the bank's fraud investigation closed in my favor. The $18,412 was formally removed from my credit history as an unauthorized account, and my score began the slow climb back that these things always require, not instant, not dramatic, just steady, the way a ledger corrects itself once the wrong entries are found and reversed. Mag estimated it would take roughly 8 to 10 months for my score to fully recover to where it had been before any of this started. It took 9. Loretta Vance, once she understood the full picture, restructured her loan directly with Brian rather than treating it as a joint arrangement with me, on terms she and Mag's paralegal helped draft properly this time, with an actual signature, actually his own. She called me about 3 weeks after the cookout, her voice careful in a way I hadn't heard from her before, and apologized for putting me in the position of correcting her in front of the whole yard. I told her she had nothing to apologize for, she had trusted a story she'd been told in good faith, the same as everyone else standing under those pecan trees that afternoon. She still sends me a card every Christmas. This past one had a $5 Buc-ee's gift card tucked inside it, with a note that just said, "For gas money. You've earned a break." I keep that note in the same drawer as the folder. Walter Nunez never mentioned the break room conversation again, though about 2 months after the cookout he stopped by my desk to drop off an unrelated permit file and said, quietly, without making it a bigger thing than it needed to be, "For what it's worth, I figured something was off back in October. Wasn't my business to say so." I told him I appreciated him not saying so at the time, and I meant it, because some things a person has to find out on their own timeline, in their own building, at their own counter. Priscilla Ortiz and I ended up on a joint training panel the following spring, teaching new inspectors about conflict of interest boundaries when family members operate food businesses within a district. She never brought up that Saturday at the truck directly, but during the session, when a trainee asked what to do if you suspect something is wrong but it isn't technically part of your inspection, she looked at me for half a second before she answered, and I understood the answer was, in part, for me too, you write down what you observed. You don't have to solve it that day. Sometimes the person it belongs to needs to find it on their own. Brian kept the food truck. He lost the second location. The bank would not extend credit for the patio expansion once the fraudulent card was closed and the true state of his finances became visible without my name propping it up, but the original truck, the one that started it all with an $1,100 purchase and a bad transmission, kept running on the feeder road near the outlet mall, under his name only, this time. I know because I still drive past it sometimes on my way to inspections in that part of the county, and I still see the line of customers on a Saturday morning. And I feel something complicated every time, which I think is simply what it feels like to still love someone you had to correct in front of 40 people. He did file, eventually, a proper certified food manager application under his own name, taking the same 4-hour course and the same exam I took 8 years earlier. He passed. My mother told me that with real pride in her voice, and this time I let myself feel proud too, because it was, finally, entirely his. We do not talk every week the way we used to. We talk enough. Thanksgiving was quieter than it used to be, careful in the way two people are careful with each other after something has broken and been set back on the shelf, not repaired exactly, but not thrown away either. I think about that folder sometimes, sitting in my trunk for 2 days before I finally opened it in front of my whole family. I think about how much I wanted, at every single stage of this, to just let it go quietly, to spare everyone the discomfort of watching me correct the record out loud. But I have spent 9 years walking into other people's kitchens, checking the temperature of things that are supposed to be safe, writing down exactly what I find whether or not the owner wants to hear it. I know, better than most people, what happens when you let a small problem sit uninspected because confronting it feels harder than ignoring it. It does not stay small. It grows in the dark, exactly the way my brother's debt grew in the dark, 18 months and $18,000 at a time, while everyone around him kept telling themselves the truck was doing fine. I think, too, about the difference between the version of that afternoon my family will remember and the version that actually happened. In their memory, I suspect, it will always be the moment I embarrassed my brother in front of everyone, the day the cookout turned. I understand why it might settle into memory that way. Public correction always looks louder from the outside than it feels from the inside. From where I was standing, holding a folder I had carried in my trunk for 2 days, it did not feel like an explosion. It felt like the last page of an inspection report, the part where you write down exactly what you found, sign your name, and hand it over, knowing the finding will speak for itself whether or not the room wants to hear it. A name is not a decoration. It is not something you can borrow the way you borrow a cup of sugar and quietly return before anyone notices it was gone. My name has my certification number attached to it, and my credit history, and my 9 years of showing up on time and writing down the truth even when it costs someone money they'd rather keep. My brother did not steal a truck or a sum of cash. He borrowed the only thing I had ever built entirely by myself, and he did it a little at a time, the way most people do the worst things they do, not in one dramatic moment, but in 100 small ones that each felt, on their own, forgivable. Trust is not a document you file once. It is something you refile every single time someone asks to use your name for something, and it is always worth asking exactly what you are agreeing to before you say yes. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.